You forgot to pay last week. You eat here, you work here. Sit down, ma'am, you're blocking the door, that's my mother. Then take her with you. I send money every month. You sent it to the wrong hands. I never stopped looking for her. Then look at what's left. After 8 years building a company in London, Adrian Cole returned to Pittsburgh in the back of a black Bentley with a leather briefcase, a tailored coat, and a phone full of unanswered messages to a woman who had stopped replying 2 winters ago. He had come home for a single afternoon, just long enough to surprise his mother for her 64th birthday. He had reserved the private room at the Italian place she used to talk about. He had ordered the cake 3 days in advance. He had even bought her a small gold pendant shaped like a sparrow because she had kept one just like it on her dresser when he was a boy. But the house on Larimer Avenue was dark when the car pulled up. The curtains were gone. The porch light had been removed from its socket, and the neighbor across the street, an older man Adrian barely recognized, leaned against his fence and said only 6 words before going back inside. "She doesn't live there anymore, son. Welcome to today's story." If emotional family dramas with shocking twists keep you watching to the end, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And before we begin, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. To understand how Marlene Cole ended up where Adrian eventually found her, the story has to begin earlier that same afternoon, in the hour before he learned that everything he had been told for the last 3 years was a careful, deliberate lie. The Bentley had picked him up at the airport just after noon. The driver, a quiet man named Curtis, had taken the long way through the city because Adrian asked him to. He wanted to see the streets again. He wanted to recognize something. Pittsburgh in late October looked the way he remembered it, the river's slate gray under a low sky, the bridges flecked with rust, the maple trees on the hillsides burning orange against the brick. He had grown up here. He had left here. And in the 8 years he had been gone, he had built something his mother had never quite understood, a logistics firm that started with one warehouse in Birmingham and grew into 11 across 2 continents. He had sent her money every month. He had been careful about it. In the early years, when the company was still small and he was sleeping on a friend's couch in Croydon, he had still found a way to wire something home, even if it was only $200. When the company grew, the amount grew with it. By the time the second warehouse opened, he was sending $1,500 a month. By the fifth, he was sending $3,000. He had told her once on a phone call to stop working her shifts at the diner, that she didn't need to be on her feet at 60 anymore, that the money was steady now and would stay steady. She had laughed in that quiet way she had and said working kept her young. Adrian had let it go. He told himself she was stubborn, that she would slow down when she was ready. The calls had thinned over the last 3 years. He had noticed, of course he had noticed, but he had told himself it was distance, schedules, time zones. His sister Bernadette had taken over most of the communication. "Mama is good. Mama went to the doctor and everything is fine. Mama said to tell you she loves you, but the phone is acting up again." Adrian had accepted those messages the way a tired man accepts weather, without questioning whether the sky outside really matched the forecast. Now the Bentley sat idling in front of a house with no lights, and the old neighbor had already gone back inside, and Adrian stood on the cracked sidewalk holding a small wrapped pendant in a velvet box, feeling for the first time in 8 years that something had been kept from him on purpose. Adrian stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the velvet box still in his hand, the cold air pulling at the edges of his coat. Curtis waited by the car without speaking. He had driven enough people through enough quiet moments to know when silence was the right thing to offer. Adrian finally turned and walked up the cracked path to the porch. The boards groaned under his shoes. He pressed the doorbell. Nothing. He hadn't really expected anything. He knocked anyway, 3 slow knocks, the way his mother used to knock on his bedroom door when he was a boy and had stayed up too late reading. The sound moved through the empty house and came back to him hollow. He stepped off the porch and walked around the side. The driveway was empty. The garden bed where his mother had grown tomatoes every summer was buried under dead leaves. The kitchen window at the back had a thin film of dust on the inside of the glass, like no one had stood at that sink in months. He pressed his palm against the pane and tried to see through. The kitchen table was gone. The chairs were gone. The little radio she kept on the windowsill, the one that had played gospel on Sunday mornings for as long as he could remember, was gone. He walked back to the front. The old neighbor's porch light came on. Adrian crossed the street before the man could disappear again. The neighbor, whose name Adrian was starting to remember as Mr. Halloway, opened the door before Adrian could knock. He had a coffee mug in one hand and a quiet, careful expression on his face. "You're the son," Mr. Halloway said, "the one who left." "I went to London," Adrian said, "for work." Mr. Halloway nodded slowly. "I figured. You've got the look of someone who did all right." He paused. "Your mother used to talk about you. She'd stand on the porch in the summer and tell anyone who'd listen that her boy was building things across the ocean. She was proud." Adrian felt something tighten in his throat. "Where is she, Mr. Halloway?" The old man took a long sip from his mug. "She moved out," he said. "About 2 years ago, maybe a little more. Your sister came one weekend with a truck and they cleared the place. I asked Marlene where she was going and she just said, with Bernadette for a while. She didn't look happy about it, but she didn't look like she was being made to either. Just tired. Like she'd been talked into something and didn't have the energy to argue. She never told me," Adrian said. Mr. Halloway looked at him then, really looked at him, the way older men sometimes do when they're deciding whether to be kind or honest. He chose honest. "Son," he said, "your mother stopped getting letters from you about 3 years back. That's what she told me. She used to bring the mail in and sit on this porch and read whatever you'd sent. Then one summer she stopped. I asked her once if everything was all right between you two. She said you were busy. She said it the way people say things they've been told to say." Adrian's hand closed around the velvet box in his pocket. He could feel the edges of it pressing into his palm. "I wrote her every month," he said. "Cards. Birthday cards, Christmas cards. I sent her money." Mr. Halloway's face shifted just slightly. "Money went somewhere," he said. "Just didn't go to this house. I'd see her walking to the bus stop in the snow last winter with a coat that wasn't warm enough. I offered her a ride more than once. She always said she was fine." He took another sip of coffee. "Folks here looked out for her where we could, but she stopped letting us in. I think she was ashamed of something, though she had no reason to be." Adrian thanked him quietly and walked back to the Bentley. Curtis was already holding the door open. Adrian didn't get in right away. He stood there with one hand on the roof of the car, looking back at the house he had paid the mortgage on for the last 6 years. The mortgage statements had come to his London office. He had wired the payments himself. The house was his, technically. He had bought it for her so she would never have to worry about rent again, and someone had emptied it and walked her out the door. "Where to, sir?" Curtis asked. "My sister's," Adrian said. "Squirrel Hill. I have the address." The drive to Squirrel Hill took 20 minutes. Adrian didn't speak for most of it. He watched the city slide past the window, the same way he had watched the clouds slide past the airplane window that morning, with the strange detachment of a man who knows something is wrong but hasn't yet been told what. He pulled out his phone and scrolled back through 3 years of messages. The pattern was clearer now that he was looking for it. The voice notes from his mother had stopped in the spring 3 years ago. After that, every message tagged from her phone had been short, typed, and ended the same way. "Love you, son. Talk soon." His mother had never typed those words in her life. She always sent voice notes. She had told him once that her thumbs were too thick for the little letters and that she liked hearing his name in her own voice better than seeing it on a screen. He scrolled further. He found a transfer receipt from 18 months ago. $3,000 sent to the account he had set up for her years before, the account she had told him she preferred because the bank was close to her diner. He had never questioned why the account name on the wire confirmation read M. Cole/B. Cole as joint. He had assumed it was a clerical detail. He had been wrong. Bernadette's house sat on a tree-lined street where the leaves had been raked into neat piles at the curb. The house itself was a renovated brick colonial with a freshly painted black door and a wreath of dried eucalyptus hanging from a brass knocker. There was a new car in the driveway, a white SUV with dealer plates still in the window. Adrian recognized the model. He had looked at the same one in London the year before and decided against it because the lease was too high for what it offered. He stood on the sidewalk staring at it for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked up the steps and knocked. Bernadette opened the door wearing a cashmere sweater and the kind of careful smile she had been perfecting since they were children. For a second, just a second, her eyes widened. Then the smile slid back into place. "Adrian," she said, "you should have called. I wanted to surprise her," he said, "for her birthday. I went to the house." Bernadette stepped aside to let him in. The hallway smelled of cinnamon and something baking. A small table by the door held a stack of mail and a bowl of car keys. Adrian glanced at the mail as he passed. 2 of the envelopes were addressed to Marlene Cole, care of Bernadette's address. He kept walking. The living room was beautiful in the way magazines are beautiful. Cream furniture, a low coffee table with a stack of decorating books, a fireplace that had been recently used. Adrian sat down on the edge of the couch because Bernadette gestured for him to sit. She remained standing. "Where is she?" he asked. Bernadette folded her arms across her chest. "She's resting," she said. "She had a long morning. She doesn't do well with surprises anymore, Adrian. Her memory has been getting worse. I should have told you, but I didn't want to worry you while you were so busy over there." "Worse how?" Adrian said. Bernadette sighed the way people sigh when they want a conversation to end before it starts. "She forgets things," she said. "She gets confused about where she is. The doctor said it's early-stage dementia. We've been managing it. She lives here now. It's safer for her this way." "When did this start?" Adrian asked. "Slowly," Bernadette said. "A couple of years ago. I didn't want to alarm you. You were finishing the Birmingham expansion. You had enough on your plate." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. He had built a company by reading the spaces between what people said. He could hear in the practiced cadence of her voice the shape of something rehearsed. He set the velvet box on the coffee table between them. The small gold sparrow caught the lamplight through the velvet. "I'd like to see her," he said. "Now please." Bernadette didn't move. "She's not here right now," she said finally. "She's at her appointment. Her aide takes her on Tuesdays." Adrian glanced at his watch. It was a Thursday. Bernadette saw him look at the watch. She saw him register the day. Adrian watched her face for the flicker, and the flicker came, brief and well-controlled, but there. She recovered quickly. She always had. Even as a child, Bernadette had been the one who could lie to their mother about a broken vase and walk away believed. "I meant her standing Thursday appointment," she said. "The senior center. They do a memory group. It's good for her." "Which senior center?" Adrian said. "The one on Forbes," Bernadette said. "The community building. They'll be done at 4. Adrian made a small note of the time. It was just past 2. He stood up. "I'll wait," he said. "I'll drive over and pick her up myself." Bernadette's hand moved to the back of the armchair. "It's not a good idea, Adrian. She gets agitated when there's a change in routine. The aide is supposed to bring her home. If she sees you out of nowhere after all this time, she could have an episode. It happened in July when the mailman was new." "She didn't sleep for 2 days. Adrian looked at her. "Bernadette," he said quietly, "when did you last actually take her to that center?" "This morning," Bernadette said without hesitation. Then she added, because she felt the weight of his stare, "She goes every Thursday. You can call them if you want. They know her." "I will," he said. He pulled out his phone and started typing the name into a search. Bernadette watched him do it. She didn't try to stop him. She watched him the way a person watches a fuse burn, calculating how much rope she had left. The center picked up on the 3rd ring. A pleasant woman with a tired voice confirmed that yes, they ran a memory care group on Thursday afternoons, and yes, she was happy to check the attendance list. Adrian gave his mother's name. There was a pause on the other end. A keyboard clicked. The woman came back and said, with the kind of polite confusion that meant she was trying not to embarrass anyone, that they had no record of a Marlene Cole, not today, not this month, not ever. Adrian thanked her and hung up. Bernadette had moved while he was on the phone. She had moved closer to the hallway, the way people drift toward exits without realizing they are doing it. "Where is she?" Adrian said. Bernadette opened her mouth. Adrian held up one hand. "Bernadette." "Where is our mother?" For a long second she didn't answer. Then her shoulders dropped just slightly, and Adrian saw something in her face he had never seen before, not regret exactly, but the closest thing to it she was capable of producing. The look of a person who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told they could finally set it down, even though setting it down meant being seen holding it in the first place. "She works," Bernadette said. Adrian waited. "She works at a diner," Bernadette said, "the one off Penn Avenue, the Bluebird. She picked up shifts there about 2 years ago. She wanted to, I couldn't stop her." 2 years ago, Adrian repeated. Bernadette didn't answer. "She lives there," Adrian said. "Doesn't she?" "Not here." Bernadette looked at the floor. "There's a room upstairs over the diner," she said. "The owner rents it cheap. It's clean. She has her own bathroom. She wanted her independence." "Adrian, you don't understand how she is. She didn't want to live with me. She didn't want to be a burden." Adrian felt something cold spread through his chest. Not anger yet. The thing that comes before anger, when the body understands before the mind does that a line has been crossed and cannot be uncrossed. "I bought her a house," he said. "I know," Bernadette said. "I sent money for her every month," he said, "for 8 years. I know." He took a step toward her, not threatening, just closer. "Bernadette," he said, "where did the money go?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He had walked past the white SUV in the driveway. He had seen the renovated kitchen through the doorway. He had smelled the cinnamon and the fresh paint and the kind of comfortable life that costs more than a nurse's salary. He picked up the velvet box from the coffee table. He put it back in his coat pocket. He walked out the front door without closing it behind him. Curtis was already in the driver's seat when Adrian came down the steps. He must have read something in the way Adrian moved, because he had the engine running and the back door unlocked before Adrian reached the curb. Adrian slid in and closed the door. The cinnamon smell of Bernadette's house clung to his coat for a moment, then thinned out into the leather and quiet of the car. "The Bluebird Diner," Adrian said. "Off Penn Avenue." "Yes, sir," Curtis said. The drive took 9 minutes. Adrian spent most of it looking at his phone. He pulled up his banking app and scrolled back through every monthly transfer he had made for the last 3 years. He looked at the account name on the receiving end. M. Cole/B. Cole. Joint. He thought about the day his mother had asked him to add Bernadette to the account 4 years ago, just in case. She had said, "In case I'm in the hospital and can't sign for something." He had agreed without thinking. He had been 29 and proud and busy, and he had agreed because his mother had asked. He thought about the mortgage payments on the Larimer Avenue house. He had been wiring those to a separate account, an escrow tied to the bank that held the loan. That money had gone where it was supposed to go. The house was paid down to the last $12,000. He owned it, or rather, his mother did. The deed was in her name. He had insisted on that. He had wanted her to have something that was hers. He thought about a phone call 18 months ago. He had been in a taxi in Berlin between 2 warehouse inspections, and his mother had called him. Or someone had called him from her phone. The voice had been faint, the connection bad, and the caller had said only a few sentences before the line dropped. "I'm fine, son. Don't worry. Bernie is helping." The voice had sounded right. It had sounded like her. But now, sitting in the back of the Bentley with his phone in his hand, Adrian replayed it in his memory, and he could hear, with the clarity that hindsight gives, that the voice had been a little too steady. His mother always laughed before she said, "Don't worry." She had said it without the laugh. The Bluebird sat on a corner where Penn Avenue bent slightly, between a tire shop and a shuttered laundromat. It was the kind of diner that had been there for 40 years and looked it. A green awning faded by sun, a neon sign in the window that said "Open" in red, with the O flickering. A few cars in the small lot beside the building, mostly older models, mostly clean. The kind of place where the regulars came at the same time every day and the waitresses knew their orders without asking. Curtis pulled up to the curb across the street. Adrian sat for a moment, looking at the front window. He could see movement inside. The shape of a woman in an apron carrying a coffee pot. The shape of a man in a booth lifting a newspaper. He couldn't see his mother, not yet. "You want me to wait here, sir?" Curtis asked. "Yes," Adrian said. "I might be a while." He got out of the car. The wind was sharper now, the kind of late October wind that finds the gap between scarf and collar. He crossed the street and stood for a second outside the diner door, his hand on the cold metal of the handle. He didn't know what he was about to see. He only knew that whatever it was, he wasn't ready for it, and that being ready wasn't going to be offered to him. He pushed the door open. A small bell rang above his head. The warm air of the diner hit him at once: coffee, bacon grease, the faint sweetness of pancake syrup, the smell of a place that had been feeding people the same things for decades. Conversation didn't stop. Heads didn't turn the way they do in movies. A man in a baseball cap glanced up from his eggs and went back to them. A waitress at the counter wrote something on a pad and didn't look up at all. Adrian stepped inside. He scanned the room slowly. Booths along the left wall, a counter with stools along the right, a pass-through window to the kitchen at the back. And then he saw her. She was standing at the far booth, leaning forward to wipe the table with a damp rag. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, almost entirely gray now, pulled back in a small clip. She wore a faded blue apron over a long-sleeved shirt. Her shoulders were thinner than he remembered. She moved slowly, the way people move when their feet have been hurting for a long time and they have stopped noticing. It was her. It was his mother. And she didn't see him yet. Adrian stood near the door longer than he meant to. A waitress passing with 2 plates of eggs said, "Sit anywhere you like, hun." And he heard her without really hearing her. He moved to a booth near the front window, the one with the best angle on the back of the diner, and slid into the seat with his coat still buttoned. From there he could watch his mother without being seen. She finished wiping the booth and stood up slowly, one hand pressed briefly to the small of her back. She picked up a plastic tub of dirty dishes from the next table and carried it toward the kitchen pass-through. She walked carefully, the way a person walks when they have learned that hurrying costs more than it saves. He watched her shoulders. He watched the slight tilt of her head. He watched her set the tub down on the counter and exchange a few words with someone behind the window. Then she pulled an order pad from the pocket of her apron and turned back toward the floor. She was working a full shift, at 64, on feet that had been hurting for years, in a diner where the tips were probably $6 a meal on a good day. And somewhere in Squirrel Hill there was a white SUV with dealer plates and a renovated kitchen and a fireplace that had been recently used. A waitress stopped at his booth. She was younger, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a name tag that said Renata. "What can I get you, sweetheart?" she said. "Coffee," Adrian said. "Black." "And whatever the pie is today." Renata smiled and wrote it down. As she turned to go, Adrian said quietly, "The woman in the back booth, the one in the blue apron, how long has she worked here?" Renata paused. She looked at him properly for the first time, and Adrian could see her measuring something. The cut of his coat, maybe. The watch on his wrist. The Bentley that was almost certainly visible through the window over his shoulder. "That's Marlene," she said carefully. "She's been with us a while, couple of years." "Why, she's my mother," Adrian said. Renata's face did something complicated. Surprise first, then something softer, then something harder underneath it that wasn't quite anger but was close to it. She set her pad down on the edge of the table. "You're Adrian," she said. He nodded. Renata sat down across from him. She didn't ask if she could, she just sat. She glanced toward the back of the diner where Marlene was now taking an order from a man in a Steelers cap, then back at Adrian. "She talks about you," Renata said, "all the time. She's got a picture of you in her room upstairs, from your graduation. She showed me once. She said her son was going to come home one day and surprise her, and she wanted to look nice when he did. She gets her hair done at the place on the corner once a month, $20. She saves up for it." Adrian put his hands flat on the table because he didn't know what else to do with them. "She never told me where she was," he said. Renata watched him for a long moment. Then she said, in a low voice, "She told us her daughter was helping her. She said her son was building something big in Europe and she didn't want to distract him. She said her daughter handled all the paperwork because Marlene's eyes weren't good for screens anymore. She said her son sent money and her daughter made sure it got where it needed to go." Renata paused. She said it the way people say things they have decided to believe. Adrian closed his eyes for a second. "How did she end up here?" he said. Renata glanced toward the back again. "Her shift ends in 20 minutes, she said. You should hear it from her, but I'll tell you this. She came in here 2 years ago looking for work. She said she needed something to do with her hands. She said her daughter's house was too quiet and too full of rules. Frank, that's the owner, he didn't need another waitress, but he gave her a few shifts because she had that look, the look of someone who wasn't going to leave until somebody said yes to something. Within a month she was working 5 days. She asked about the room upstairs. Frank charges her $200 a month, that's nothing. He does it because he likes her. We all do. Renata stood up. She picked up her pad. She looked at Adrian one more time. Don't make a scene in here, she said quietly. She has her pride. Whatever you came to do, do it gentle. Then she walked back toward the kitchen, and Adrian sat alone in the booth, watching his mother carry a coffee pot toward a table of truck drivers, and he understood, finally and completely, that the woman he had been mailing money to for the last 2 years had not been his mother at all. Renata brought the coffee and a slice of apple pie a few minutes later. She set them down without speaking and gave Adrian a small look that meant she would let him decide his own moment. He thanked her quietly and waited. He watched the second hand on his watch sweep past the 12 3 times. He watched his mother refill cups for the truck drivers and laugh at something one of them said and tuck a folded bill into her apron pocket. She didn't look unhappy. That was the part that made it harder. She looked like a woman who had built a small life out of what was left to her and had decided not to be ashamed of it. At 10 minutes to 4, she untied her apron. She folded it carefully over the back of a chair. She said something to the cook through the pass-through window, and he raised a hand in answer. She walked toward the front of the diner with the slow, even pace of someone who had a destination in mind but no reason to hurry. She passed 2 booths before she saw him. She stopped. Her hand went to the back of the nearest chair. Her mouth opened slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't move forward. She just stood there with her hand on the chair, looking at him the way a person looks at a thing they have wanted for so long that they have stopped expecting it to actually arrive. Adrian stood up slowly. He didn't trust his legs at first. He came around the side of the booth and crossed the few feet between them. He didn't reach for her right away. He gave her the space to decide. "Mama," he said. Marlene's eyes filled. She didn't make a sound. She just lifted one hand and put it against the side of his face, the way she had done when he was small and had come in from outside with cold cheeks. Her fingers were thin. Her palm was warm. "You came," she said. "I came," he said. For a long second she just held her hand there. Then she let it drop and looked past him toward the window where the Bentley sat across the street, and her face changed. Not unhappy, just tired in a new way. "You did well," she said. "You did so well, baby. I came for your birthday," he said. "I had a dinner planned. I had a cake." Marlene smiled faintly. "My birthday's tomorrow," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to surprise you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Did you go to the house?" "Yes," he said. She nodded once. She had been waiting for that answer for 2 years. He could see it now, the way she had held herself ready for the day someone would finally walk through the door of the Bluebird and ask her why she was wiping down booths instead of living in the house her son had bought her. "Let me get my coat," she said. She went up a narrow staircase at the back of the diner. Adrian stayed where he was. Renata passed him with a tray and gave him a small nod. The cook leaned through the pass-through and looked at him without expression, and then went back to his grill. A man at the counter who had been pretending not to listen took a long sip of coffee and pretended a little harder. Marlene came back down in a thin coat that wasn't warm enough for the weather. She had the small handbag he remembered from his childhood, the brown leather one with the brass clasp, the one his father had bought her the year before he died. She carried it the way she had always carried it, tucked under her arm like a book. Adrian held the door open for her. The bell rang above their heads. Outside, the wind had picked up. He took off his coat without thinking and put it around her shoulders. She didn't protest. She let him do it. She let him guide her across the street to where Curtis was already stepping out to open the back door of the car. "Mama, this is Curtis," Adrian said. "Curtis, this is my mother." "It is an honor, ma'am," Curtis said, and Marlene smiled at him the way she smiled at everyone, like he was someone worth being polite to. She slid into the back seat. Adrian came around the other side and got in beside her. Curtis closed the doors gently and walked around to the driver's seat and did not ask where they were going. He understood that Adrian needed a minute. Inside the car it was very quiet. Marlene looked at the leather seats. She ran one finger along the stitching of the door. Then she looked at her son and she said, the way she had said it 1,000 times when he was a boy and had come home from school with a problem too big for him to carry alone. "Tell me what you know, baby, and I'll tell you the rest." Adrian told her what he knew. He told her about the empty house on Larimer Avenue. He told her about Mr. Halloway on the porch with the coffee mug. He told her about the white SUV in Bernadette's driveway and the cinnamon smell in the hallway and the wreath on the door. He told her about the call to the senior center. He told her about the joint account and the 8 years of transfers and the mortgage payments that had brought the house down to its last $12,000. He spoke calmly because he had learned a long time ago that calm was the only useful thing he had to offer when something had already burned. Marlene listened with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she looked out the window for a moment at the gray street and the brick storefronts sliding by, and then she began. "It started 3 years ago," she said. "After the second fall. She had slipped on the back steps in the ice and fractured her wrist. The doctor at the hospital had used the word frailty in front of Bernadette, and Bernadette had latched onto it. Bernadette had started coming by twice a week. She had brought groceries. She had paid bills at the kitchen table while Marlene watched. She had been kind at first. That was the part Marlene kept coming back to. She had been kind. Then the conversations had started. Small ones. Bernadette had said it didn't make sense for Marlene to live alone in such a big house at her age. She had said Adrian was sending money, but Adrian wasn't there. And what good was money without someone to make sure it was being used right? She had said the house had stairs that were dangerous in winter. She had said the neighborhood was changing. She had said it would be smarter, just for a little while, to come stay in Squirrel Hill, where there was a first-floor bedroom and a walk-in shower, and someone to check on her in the night. Marlene had said no for almost a year. Then one afternoon in February, the heat in the Larimer house had cut out. The boiler had failed. Bernadette had come by within an hour with a thermos of soup and a story about how the repair was going to cost $4,000 and how lucky it was that she had a guest room ready. Marlene had gone to Squirrel Hill that night with a small suitcase. She had thought it would be 3 days. The boiler, Marlene said quietly, had not actually been broken. She had found that out 6 months later when she finally went back to the house to get a winter coat she had left in the closet. The thermostat had been turned off at the breaker. The boiler started right up when she flipped it back on. By then her things were already in boxes in Bernadette's basement, and the house had been put up for a quiet listing through a friend of Bernadette's husband. "She didn't sell it," Adrian said. "The deed is still in your name. I check." Marlene nodded slowly. "She tried," she said. "The listing came down after a month. I don't know why. I think the price was too low for what it was and the friend got nervous. But she tried. And the money," Adrian said. Marlene looked at her hands. "She said she was managing it for me," she said. "She said my eyes weren't good for the computer anymore. That part was true. She said she would put what I needed in an envelope on the kitchen counter every Monday morning. At first it was $300, then 2, then 1, then sometimes nothing. When I asked, she would say the bills had been high that month. She would show me a folder of papers. I didn't read them carefully. She is my daughter. I didn't want to read them carefully." "When did you start working at the diner?" Adrian asked. "A year and a half ago," Marlene said. "I needed walking around money. I needed to feel useful. I needed to not ask. Frank gave me the room upstairs because I asked him for it one afternoon when Bernadette had said something at breakfast about how I left the bathroom light on too long. I packed a bag that night. I have been there since." Adrian was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you call me?" he said finally. Marlene looked at him then. Her eyes were clear and unembarrassed. "Because she told me you were tired of me, baby," she said. "She told me you were sending the money out of guilt. She told me you had a new life and a woman over there and you didn't want to be reminded of an old mother in Pittsburgh. She showed me messages on her phone. Things she said were from you. I didn't read them carefully either." Adrian didn't speak for a long moment. He watched a traffic light change through the window. He watched a woman with a stroller cross at the corner. He thought about all the messages he had sent over the last 3 years, the long ones written from airports and hotel rooms, the ones where he had asked her how the garden was doing and whether the new neighbors had introduced themselves, and whether she needed anything sent ahead for Thanksgiving. He had assumed she had read them. He had assumed she had chosen the short typed replies because her hands were tired. He had built an entire architecture of small assumptions, and every one of them had been the wrong shape. "Mama," he said. "Don't," she said gently. "Don't sit there and blame yourself in front of me. I didn't raise you to do that. You sent what you said you would send. You called when you said you would call. I'm the one who stopped picking up the phone when she said it was you. I'm the one who believed her over you. That's mine to carry, not yours." "It isn't," Adrian said. Marlene reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were thin, but her grip was steadier than he expected. "Listen to me," she said. "I want to tell you something I've been thinking about for 2 years. I'm not broken. I'm tired. There's a difference. I have a job I can do. I have a room with a window that looks at the river. I have Renata and Frank and a man named Eugene who comes in for coffee every morning and tells me about his grandchildren. I built that out of what I had. I'm not ashamed of any of it. The only thing that hurt was thinking you had forgotten me. And now I know you didn't, so the rest of it I can put down." Adrian held her hand for a while without speaking. Then he said, "The house is still yours. I want to take you home tonight." Marlene was quiet for a moment. "The boiler works," she said. "Yes," he said. "The kitchen," she said. "My table, it's all there," Adrian said. "It's in the basement at Bernadette's. We'll get it back." She nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "but not tonight. Tonight I want to sleep in my own bed upstairs at the Bluebird. I told Frank I'd open in the morning. Eugene comes at 6. He'll worry if I'm not there." Adrian almost argued. Then he didn't. He understood, in a way he hadn't understood an hour ago, that the woman next to him had built something for herself when no one else was building anything for her, and that ripping her out of it in one evening, even to put her somewhere better, would be its own kind of taking. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow then, after your shift. We'll go to the house together." She squeezed his hand. "Good," she said. And then more quietly, "What about your sister?" Adrian looked out the window. The Bentley had pulled up to the diner again. The neon open sign was still flickering. The wind had pushed a few leaves up against the curb. "I'm going to call a lawyer in the morning," he said. "A good one. We're going to look at every transaction in that joint account for the last 3 years. We're going to look at the listing on the house. We're going to look at the messages she sent from your phone. And then we're going to decide together what you want to do." "I don't want her in jail, Adrian," Marlene said. "I know," he said. "I want her to give back what she took," Marlene said. "I want her to look at me and say what she did. I want her to do it in a room with a witness. After that, I'll decide what kind of mother I'm going to be to her. But I want the saying out loud. I've earned that much." "You've earned more than that," Adrian said. "That's the part I get to decide," Marlene said. Curtis cleared his throat softly from the front seat. "Sir," he said, "ma'am, there's a hotel I can recommend 3 blocks from here if you'd like to be close by tonight." Marlene smiled. "That's kind of you, Curtis," she said, "but I'm going upstairs to bed. My son can come for breakfast. The eggs are good. The pancakes are better." Adrian laughed, a small startled laugh that surprised him as much as it surprised her. He hadn't laughed all day. It came out a little broken, but it came out. He walked her across the street. He walked her into the diner and past the booths and to the foot of the narrow staircase at the back. He held her coat while she found her key. He kissed the top of her head before she went up. He watched her climb, one slow step at a time, her hand on the railing. At the top she turned and looked down at him. 6 in the morning, she said. "Don't be late." "I won't," he said. Adrian was at the Bluebird at 5:45. The sky over Penn Avenue was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn blue that holds the cold close to the pavement. Curtis had offered to come back at a more reasonable hour. Adrian had told him to sleep in. He had walked the 3 blocks from the hotel himself with his hands in the pockets of his coat and his breath visible in front of him. And by the time he reached the diner, Frank was already unlocking the front door from the inside. Frank was a heavy man in his late 60s with a flour-dusted apron and the kind of face that had decided a long time ago not to be surprised by anything. He looked Adrian up and down once, took in the coat and the shoes and the watch, and then he stuck out a thick hand. "You're the son," he said. "I am," Adrian said. "She's making the coffee," Frank said. "She wouldn't let me touch it. She said you always liked it strong." Adrian followed him inside. The diner was warm. The lights over the counter were on. Marlene stood at the big silver urn in her blue apron, measuring grounds into the filter with the careful attention of a woman performing a ritual. She looked up when she heard the bell. She smiled at him the way she used to smile at him when he came down the stairs as a boy on his birthday and found pancakes waiting. "Sit," she said. "Eugene comes at 6. You have 15 minutes to be just my son." He sat at the counter. She set a mug in front of him and filled it. She set a plate of pancakes in front of him a few minutes later. She didn't sit down. She moved around the counter and the floor with the small, unhurried efficiency he had watched from the booth the day before, and he understood now that this was what she had meant when she said she had built something. It wasn't the diner. It was the moving through it. It was the knowing where every cup was kept. Eugene came at 6. He was a thin man with white hair and a green coat. He sat 2 stools down from Adrian and Marlene poured his coffee without asking. Eugene looked at Adrian once, then at Marlene, then at Adrian again, and he said only, "Your boy." "My boy," Marlene said. "Good," Eugene said and opened his newspaper. Adrian ate his pancakes. They were better than the ones at the hotel. At 8, after the breakfast rush had thinned, Marlene took off her apron and folded it the way she had folded it the day before. She went upstairs and came down 10 minutes later with a small suitcase and the brown leather handbag. Frank walked her to the door and hugged her without saying anything and went back to his grill before she could see his face. Adrian carried her suitcase to the car. Curtis had pulled up at 7:30 without being asked. He held the door open for Marlene and she patted his arm as she got in. The drive to Larimer Avenue took 12 minutes. The boiler was on by the time they arrived. Adrian had called a service the night before and paid extra for a same-morning visit. The man had let himself in with the spare key Adrian kept in London and had left the thermostat at 68. The house was warm when Marlene stepped through the front door. She stood in the entryway with her coat still on and looked at the empty rooms for a long moment. "It needs a table," she said finally. "We'll get the table back," Adrian said. "Today, if you want." "Today," she said. The lawyer called at 10. Bernadette had returned 3 of her 4 calls already. The white SUV was being returned to the dealership by Friday. The basement in Squirrel Hill was being emptied into a moving truck that afternoon. The full accounting would take weeks. The conversation with Bernadette in a room with a witness would happen on Monday at 11. Marlene sat in the chair by the front window, the one spot where the morning sun came through fully, and she watched Adrian on the phone in the kitchen, and when he hung up she said, "Sit with me a minute." He sat on the floor next to her chair the way he had when he was small. She put her hand on his head. "You came home," she said. "I'm staying for a while," he said. "How long is a while?" she said. "As long as you want," he said. She didn't answer. She just kept her hand where it was, and they watched the light move across the empty floor, and somewhere upstairs the radiator clicked on for the first time in 2 years, and the house began, slowly, to remember itself. If this story moved you, take a moment today to call someone who might be waiting quietly for the sound of your voice. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones who have decided not to ask. Subscribe for more stories about the families we build, the families we lose, and the long road back to the ones we almost let go. Leave a comment below telling me what part of this story stayed with you the most. I read every one. And until next time, be the person who shows up.